There's a moment in every child's life, a son or daughter, when they feel utterly invalidated by their father. A specific moment, a searing instant, when something inside them just dies. Maybe it was when you brought home a good report card, and he didn't even look up from his newspaper. Maybe it was when you scored the winning goal, and you looked up to the stands, and he wasn't there. Maybe it was when you tried to hug him, and you felt his body just tense up. In that moment, a part of you understood a devastating truth: you would never be enough. Carl Jung spent decades studying what happens in a child's psyche when their father fails to validate them. And what he discovered explains why you, even today, desperately seek approval, why you never feel worthy, why there's this empty space inside you that nothing seems to fill. Hold on to that thought, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you understand your entire life. Paternal validation isn't some emotional luxury. It's not just whining. It's not modern generation nonsense. Jung discovered that a father's validation is one of the fundamental pillars of developing the self. When that validation is missing, the child's self forms with a hole in the center, a structural void that they will carry throughout their life. And this void has a technical name in Jungian psychology: the negative father complex. Hold on, because I'm going to explain exactly what this means. In practical terms, in your life. The father complex is a psychological structure that forms in childhood through experiences with your father or your father figure. When these experiences are positive, when there's validation, recognition, presence, the complex forms in a healthy way. The child internalizes an image of their father that sustains them, that approves of them, that makes them feel safe in the world. But when the father is emotionally absent, when he never validates, when he constantly ignores or criticizes, the complex forms in a distorted way. The child internalizes an image of a father who rejects them, who disapproves of them, who makes them feel fundamentally inadequate. And here's the problem: this internalized image doesn't stay confined to the relationship with your father. It projects onto every authority figure you encounter in life: your boss, your professor, your partner, your therapist, even God. You don't see these people as they are. You see them through the lens of your father complex, and if that complex is negative, you're constantly expecting rejection, seeking approval that never comes, feeling inadequate in the face of any authority. This isn't abstract psychology. This is happening in your life right now. Let me tell you about Ethan. Ethan was 42 years old when he finally understood why his career never took off. He was competent, talented, hard-working, but every time he was about to be promoted, something happened. He sabotaged himself, argued with superiors, made inexplicable mistakes. In therapy, Ethan discovered that his father had never recognized anything he did, not once. Good grades were met with silence. Achievements were ignored. When Ethan tried to show something he had accomplished, his father would change the subject or point out some flaw. At 42 years old, Ethan was still trying to prove to his father that he was enough. Only now, he was doing it through bosses, mentors, any male authority figure. And because his father complex told him he would never be validated, he unconsciously created situations where that prophecy was fulfilled. Jung called this the compulsion to repeat. The person unconsciously recreates the conditions of the original wound in a paradoxical attempt to finally have a different outcome. But the outcome is never different, because the pattern is within, not without. Keep Ethan's case in mind, because I'll come back to it later when I talk about healing. Now, I need to explain something that few therapists fully understand. Paternal validation isn't just emotional, it's archetypal. Jung identified that the father represents, in the collective unconscious, the archetype of the logos, order, structure, law, the external world. The mother represents eros, love, nurturing, the inner world. When the father validates the child, he's doing more than saying that the child is good. He's transmitting an archetypal message. You have a place in the world. You belong. You are capable of dealing with the reality out there. When that validation doesn't come, the child grows up feeling that they don't belong in the world, that external reality is hostile, and they are inadequate to face it, that they need to constantly prove their worth, to have the right to exist. This explains why people with a negative father complex often have imposter syndrome. No matter how much they achieve, they always feel they will be discovered as frauds, because deep down, the voice of the internalized father keeps saying, "You are not enough." And here's something disturbing. That voice isn't perceived as coming from the father. It's perceived as objective truth about themselves. The person doesn't think, "My father made me feel inadequate." They think, "I am inadequate." The wound becomes identity. The complex becomes the self. This is perhaps the most insidious aspect of the validation trauma. It disguises itself as reality. I'm going to show you now the phases of how this wound forms and crystallizes. Phase 1, the primary absence. In the first years of life, the child begins to perceive that something is missing in the relationship with the father, not necessarily on a conscious level. Babies don't think in terms of validation, but they feel. They register. The father who doesn't make eye contact, the father who hands the child back to the mother when he cries, the father who is physically present but emotionally absent, the father who works too much, the father who prefers the television. The child doesn't have words for it, but their nervous system is registering a message: "I am not interesting enough to hold my father's attention." Phase 2, the compensatory search. As the child grows, they begin to actively try to win the father's validation. They strive in school. They try to be the perfect child. They suppress their needs so as not to bother him. They become what they imagine the father wants. This phase is particularly painful because the child still has hope. They believe that if they can be good enough, they will finally receive the look of approval that they so desperately desire. But that look never comes, or it comes so scarcely and conditionally that it never satisfies. Hold on, because that hope will die soon. And when it dies, something much worse takes its place. Phase 3, the death of hope. At some point in childhood or adolescence, the child finally understands that no matter what they do, the father will not validate them. There's this moment, a really pivotal moment in every child's life, where they feel utterly invalidated by their father. It's not just a feeling, it's a specific moment, a searing instant when something deep inside them just dies. It's not because the child isn't good enough, but because the father is incapable of giving them what they truly need. This moment of realization should be liberating. After all, the child finally understands that the problem isn't them. But paradoxically, this moment often intensifies the wound, because along with that hope, a part of the child dies too. The part that believed they were worthy of love, the part that expected a fair world where effort is always rewarded, the part that trusted, and in place of that dead hope is born the emptiness. Phase 4, the structural void. This is the stage where the wound crystallizes into a permanent pattern. The emptiness has ceased to be a temporary absence of validation and has become a structural characteristic of the psyche. Carl Jung would describe this as an autonomy of the complex. The negative father complex becomes so strong that it begins to operate independently, influencing thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without the person even realizing it. Carl Jung, the brilliant Swiss psychiatrist, really dove deep into these kinds of hidden forces that shape us. The person doesn't know why they constantly feel inadequate. They don't understand why they seek approval so desperately. They don't comprehend why they sabotage their own achievements. They just live like this, as if it's normal, as if it's just who they are. And here's what Jung said that makes it all even more complicated. The void created by the absence of paternal validation doesn't remain empty. The psyche abhors a vacuum. It needs to fill it with something. And what generally fills this void are dysfunctional defense mechanisms. Some develop compensatory grandiosity. If their father didn't validate them, they'll validate themselves in an exaggerated narcissistic way. They become that person who constantly needs to prove their superiority. Others develop the opposite, chronic submissiveness. If validation never came, maybe it's because they don't deserve it, so they negate themselves, diminish themselves, put themselves below everyone else. Still others develop an alternation between the two extremes. Sometimes they feel superior to everyone. Sometimes they feel like the worst person in the world. No middle ground, no stability. And some fill the void with substances, with compulsive work, with destructive relationships, with anything that temporarily distracts from the fundamental pain of not having been seen by their father. But none of these fillings really work. They're like trying to fill a leaky bucket. The emptiness remains. The pain remains. The search for validation continues. Now I need to show you how this wound affects adult relationships. Remember Ethan, he didn't just have problems in his career. His romantic relationships followed an equally destructive pattern. Ethan fell in love with emotionally unavailable women. Women who, in some way, repeated the pattern of his father. Physically present, emotionally absent. And when he happened to find an available woman who truly loved him, who validated him, he lost interest. It seemed too easy. It seemed fake. It seemed like she didn't really know him. Because if she did, she wouldn't love him. Jung would explain this through the concept of anima. The anima is the feminine image in the masculine unconscious, shaped primarily by the mother, but also profoundly influenced by the negative father complex. A man with a negative father complex often has a distorted anima. He projects onto women the same dynamic of seeking and rejection that he had with his father. He seeks in them the validation that he didn't receive from him. And when the woman can't give that validation, because no woman can really heal a father wound, the relationship fails. For women, the pattern is slightly different, but equally destructive. Women with a paternal validation wound often seek in partners the approval that their father didn't give. They choose critical, distant, emotionally unavailable men because unconsciously they hope to finally conquer the love they've always desired, or they avoid men completely. Because the internalized message is, if my own father didn't find me worthy of love, why would any man? In both cases, the negative father complex is controlling choices that seem free, but aren't. Hold on to all of this, because now I'm going to reveal the most difficult part to hear. The paternal validation wound doesn't just affect how you relate to others. It affects how you relate to yourself. Jung talked about the self as the organizing center of the psyche, the archetype of totality. Healthy development involves the formation of a cohesive, integrated self, capable of self-regulation. But when paternal validation is absent, the self forms fragmented. A fundamental piece is missing. And this lack isn't just felt, it's lived in every moment, The person can't validate themselves from within. They can't feel pride in their achievements. They can't rest in their own worth. They constantly need external validation to feel minimally okay. And here's the tragedy: external validation is never enough. You can receive 1,000 compliments and still feel empty. You can conquer everything you've dreamed of and still wonder if it's enough. You can be loved deeply and still doubt that you're worthy of love, because the emptiness is inside, and no amount of external approval can fill it. This is what Jung called misdirected projection. The person projects onto the external world a need that can only be satisfied internally, and the more they seek outside, the more emptiness they feel inside. Now I'm going to explain something that will connect all of this. The father isn't just a person. In the child's psyche, the father is also a symbol. He represents something bigger than himself. Jung saw the father as the bearer of the archetype of spirit, the ability to give meaning, to create order in chaos, to face the unknown with courage. When the father validates the child, he is transmitting this archetype. He's saying, "You can do this too. You can also create meaning. You can also face the world." When that validation is absent, the child grows up without full access to this archetype. They have difficulty finding meaning. They feel lost in the face of chaos. They fear the unknown more than they should. This explains why so many people with a paternal validation wound report a persistent feeling of lack of purpose. It's not just that they don't know what to do with their lives. It's that they haven't internalized the ability to create meaning. The father who should have passed, this torch didn't pass it, and the person lives in the dark. I know this is hard to hear. I know that maybe you're feeling a weight in your chest right now, maybe tears in your eyes, maybe a rage that you didn't even know you had. That's normal. In fact, it's healthy. It means that something within you is finally being recognized. A part of you that has been invisible for decades is finally being seen. And that's the first step. Carl Jung said that what doesn't become conscious manifests as destiny. Until you face that wound, it will continue to control your life. But the moment you acknowledge it, its power begins to diminish. You're doing that now, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it hurts. But hold on, because now I'm going to show you what very few videos about narcissism and childhood reveal. The wound of paternal validation has a specific characteristic that sets it apart from other childhood wounds. It's silent. Wounds from physical abuse are visible. Wounds from literal abandonment are recognizable. Wounds from constant criticism are identifiable. But the wound of non-validation, it happens through absence, through what wasn't said, through the gaze that never came, through the hug that didn't happen. And because it's a wound of absence, it's much harder to recognize. The person grew up without validation and assumes that this is normal. They don't know what's missing because they've never had it. It's like trying to describe a color you've never seen. Jung observed that the deepest wounds are often the most invisible. What never existed leaves a mark that's harder to heal than what existed and was lost. Because you can grieve what you've lost. But how do you grieve what you never had? Here's where Carl Jung's theory becomes practical. Carl Jung believed that healing doesn't come from externally receiving what was missing. It comes from internally developing the capacity that should have been transmitted. In the case of paternal validation, this means developing the ability to validate yourself. It sounds simple, but it's terribly difficult for someone who's never learned. Because validation isn't just saying nice things to yourself. It's not superficial mirror self-help. It's not repeating affirmations you don't believe. Genuine validation is a psychic capacity. It's being able to look at yourself through the eyes of a loving father. It's being able to recognize your achievements without immediately minimizing them. It's allowing yourself to feel pride without guilt. It's knowing that you have worth, regardless of what you produce or achieve. And this capacity, when it hasn't been developed in childhood, needs to be built brick by brick in adulthood. Carl Jung called this process reparenting. It doesn't mean replacing your real parents. It means internally developing the functions they should have exercised. Remember, Ethan, I'm going to tell you what happened to him. After 2 years of Jungian therapy, Ethan finally began to understand the pattern that dominated his life. He saw how the negative father complex was behind his professional sabotages, how it was behind his failed relationships, how it was behind the emptiness he was trying to fill with excessive work. But understanding isn't the same as healing. And Ethan's healing required something much harder than intellectual insight. He needed to learn to validate himself. In the beginning, it seemed ridiculous. He felt stupid trying to acknowledge his own achievements. The voice of the internalized father shouted that it was pathetic, that it was weak, that a real man doesn't need that. But over time, a new voice began to emerge. A voice that was neither the real father nor the internalized father. A voice of his own. A voice of a healthy internal father that Ethan was building within himself. Carl Jung would say that Ethan was integrating the archetype of Logos in a healthy way. No longer through the negative father complex that he had internalized, but through a new relationship with himself. And something extraordinary happened. As Ethan developed the ability to validate himself, he stopped needing external validation so desperately. His work improved, not because he was trying to prove something, but because he could finally focus on the work itself. His relationships improved, because he was no longer seeking in partners what he needed to find in himself. The emptiness didn't disappear completely. Carl Jung was realistic about that. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but the emptiness stopped controlling Ethan's life. He learned to live with it, and more than that, he learned to fill it in a healthy way. If you're getting to this point in the video and you're recognizing your own story in what I've just described, I want to ask you something. Consider supporting this channel through the super thanks down below. This type of content about deep psychology and childhood wounds requires serious research. It's not superficial entertainment or modern generation nonsense, whining and complaining. Every time you support it, you're saying that this type of truth needs to be spoken, that people with this wound deserve to understand what happened to them, that Carl Jung's psychology deserves to be shared beyond therapy offices. And more than that, you're helping other people with the same wound find this video to finally have words for what they've always felt. Now let me give you something practical to take away from here. Carl Jung developed what he called dialogue with the shadow, a technique where you consciously converse with the parts of yourself that have been repressed or neglected. For those with a paternal validation wound, a variation of this technique can be especially powerful. It works like this. You imagine the child that you were, the child who expected the validation that never came. You visualize them clearly, the age they were, their face, the hopeful eyes that one day gave up waiting. And then you do what your father didn't do. You look at that child and say, I see you. I recognize what you've achieved. You are enough, not because you produced something extraordinary, not because you proved your worth, just because you exist. You are worthy of love simply for being who you are. It seems too simple to work, but Carl Jung knew that the unconscious responds to symbols and rituals. When you consciously offer the inner child what they never received, something changes in the psychic structure. It's not magic, it's neuroplasticity combined with shadow work. It's the creation of new neural pathways that replace the old patterns. And it needs to be repeated many times, for months, maybe years. Because the negative father complex has had decades to strengthen. Dismantling it takes time and persistence, but it's possible. Carl Jung saw it happen in his patients, and it still happens today in the offices of therapists who work with his approach. Now I need to tell you about a paradox that Carl Jung identified. Sometimes the person who needs validation the most is the one who resists receiving it the most. It seems contradictory. But it makes sense when you understand the negative father complex. If you grew up being ignored or rejected, positive validation can feel threatening. It contradicts the internal narrative you've built about yourself. It challenges the complex you've carried for decades, and the complex does not want to be challenged. It defends itself. So, when someone genuinely compliments you, you dismiss it. When someone truly loves you, you're suspicious. When someone really sees you, you hide. This isn't insanity, it's distorted self-preservation. The complex is protecting the psychic structure it knows, even if that structure is painful. Carl Jung called this complex resistance, and overcoming this resistance is an essential part of the healing process. It means allowing yourself to receive validation even when it feels wrong. It means questioning the inner voice that says you don't deserve it. It means consciously choosing to believe in those who value you. Even when the complex screams that they're wrong, it's uncomfortable, it's scary, but it's necessary, because the alternative is spending your entire life rejecting what you need most. Now, I'm going to give you a perspective you might not have considered. Your father probably wasn't validated either. This isn't an excuse. It doesn't justify what he did or didn't do, but it's context. Jung emphasized that traumas are transmitted generationally. Your father's negative father complex likely came from his father, and so on, generations back. When you look at your father not as a villain, but as another victim of the same wound, something shifts. It's not forced forgiveness. It's not spiritual bypassing. It's comprehension. And this comprehension has a very practical purpose. It allows you to break the cycle. Because if you don't do the work to heal your validation wound, you will transmit it to your children, to your relationships, to everyone who depends emotionally on you. The untreated wound perpetuates itself. The complex reproduces, and another generation grows up with the same emptiness. But you can be the person who interrupts it, not by healing completely, maybe that's impossible, but by becoming aware, by doing the work, by choosing not to repeat what was done to you. This is perhaps the deepest meaning of what Carl Jung called individuation. Not becoming perfect. Becoming conscious. Stopping acting out unconscious patterns and starting to choose consciously who you want to be. Back to the core. The emptiness your father left by not validating you is real. The pain is real. The consequences in your life are real. Nothing I've said here changes the past or minimizes what you've experienced. But the future doesn't have to be determined by the past. The capacity for validation that your father didn't transmit to you can be developed now. The complex that controls your life can be integrated. The emptiness might not disappear, but it can stop being the center of your existence. Jung didn't believe in easy cures. He knew that working with the shadow and the complexes is long, difficult, often painful. But he also knew that it's worth it, because on the other side of that work is a life where you no longer need to desperately seek external approval, where you can recognize your own worth, where you finally feel sufficient, not because someone told you, but because you've developed the capacity to see yourself through the eyes of love. This isn't superficial self-help. It's the deepest work a human being can do, and it starts with recognizing the wound. You did that today. This video isn't just information, it's the beginning of a journey your father never took, that his father never took, that entire generations never took. but you are taking it. Comment down below. What was the moment you realized your father would never validate you? How old were you when that hope died? I want to read your story, because each story shared helps others recognize their own. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, subscribe, because every week I bring content about how childhood wounds shape who we are and how we can finally start to heal. Until the next video.